Growing up, I always felt like a letdown to my parents. My mom and dad had been longing for a daughter for years, but fate had other plans when I came along. They didn't try to hide their disappointment either. I overheard them talking about how they felt like they'd been given a spare, or even worse, a remnant. As a kid, I didn't fully understand what those words meant, but as I grew older, the weight of their meaning hit me like a ton of bricks. It was painfully clear. I was just the kid they had while waiting for something better. My parents' obsession with having a daughter was almost all-consuming. They never stopped trying for another child, and it was a constant topic of conversation at family gatherings or whenever friends were over. I remember so many people telling them to appreciate the child they already had, but my parents would wave them off and say, "We don't have kids unless it's a girl." That stuck with me. When I was 15, my parents' dream finally came true. They had my sister, their miracle child. She was everything they'd ever hoped for, and from that moment on, my role in the family was reduced to nothing. They poured all their attention, money, and time into her, completely ignoring me. If I thought I was invisible before, my sister's arrival made me practically non-existent. My hobbies, interests, and even basic needs became irrelevant. Everything was about her, and I was left to fend for myself emotionally. By the time I turned 18, it was glaringly obvious they didn't want me around anymore. On my birthday, my parents sat me down, not for a celebration, but for something much colder. They told me they needed more room in the house and that I had to move out. Apparently, my presence was taking up resources they felt were better spent on my sister. I tried to reason with them, explaining that I didn't have anywhere to go and needed a little more time to save up and find a place. But they weren't interested in my excuses. They said I'd had plenty of time to prepare, and that I should manage just fine on my own. And just like that, they kicked me out. I didn't have much, just a couple of bags of clothes and whatever money I'd saved from odd jobs during high school. At first, I crashed on friends' couches, but eventually, I managed to scrape together enough for a tiny rundown apartment. Those first few years on my own were brutal. I worked every job I could find. Night shifts at convenience stores, heavy labor on construction sites, just to make ends meet. It was an endless grind, and I was constantly worried about how I'd pay rent or put food on the table. There were nights when I went to bed hungry, unsure of where my next meal would come from. Despite everything, I still tried to keep in touch with my parents. I don't know why. I should have been furious with them, but they were my parents, and part of me still hoped they cared about me even a little. I called them every now and then, hoping for some sign that they missed me. But our conversations were always short and awkward, like they couldn't wait for them to end. For 2 years I kept reaching out, hoping for some kind of connection. But it became clear that the only reason we spoke was because I was the one making the effort. They never called to check on me, never asked how I was doing. Eventually I stopped calling altogether. The silence hurt, but it hurt less than the rejection. From then on, holidays and birthdays came and went without a single message from them. It was as though I didn't exist. I figured they had their perfect little family now, and I wasn't part of it anymore. Yeah, it hurt, but I learned to make peace with it. Time moved on, and before I knew it, 9 years had passed. I'd managed to build a stable life for myself. I had a steady job, a small but comfortable place to live, and friends who had become my chosen family. I'd accepted that my parents were out of my life for good. Then, out of nowhere, a few days ago, I got a call from them. At first, I thought something bad must have happened to one of them, so I picked up. I hadn't heard their voices in almost 7 years, and they sounded frantic, almost erratic. They told me they needed to talk to me about my sister. What they said next floored me. They launched into this dramatic explanation about how my sister was going through a really rough time and was completely out of control. I was shocked. She was only 12 or 13, how bad could things really be? But as they kept talking, the picture they painted was bleak. Apparently, she was skipping school constantly, getting into fights, and even involved in some serious trouble. She was already experimenting with substances, hanging out with sketchy people, and acting completely out of hand for someone her age. They said they'd spent a ton of money trying to get her out of trouble, putting her in different programs and paying for counseling sessions, but nothing had worked. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Sure, teenagers can be difficult, but this sounded extreme. It seemed like all the years of spoiling her had finally caught up with them. After laying all of this out, they got to the real reason for their call. They wanted me to help. They asked me to come back into their lives to support them, both emotionally and financially. They said taking care of my sister had taken a massive toll on them, and they couldn't handle it anymore. They didn't just ask, they demanded that I forgive all the years of neglect and rejection, and somehow swoop in to fix everything. They tried to guilt-trip me, saying I was still their son and that family needs to stick together in hard times. I was stunned, not just by what my sister had become, but by their audacity. Where was that family sticks together mindset when I was 18, begging them to let me stay? Where was their concern when I was couch surfing and struggling to get by? They tossed me out without a second thought, and now just because things had gone south for them, they expected me to save the day. I told them no. I said I wasn't interested in helping. I reminded them that I had built a life for myself without their help, and didn't see why I should make my life harder now because they had raised my sister to be a nightmare. They did not take it well. They called me selfish and ungrateful. They accused me of abandoning them in their time of need and claimed I was holding a grudge. They said I should help because we're still your family. After listening to their rant for a while, I hung up. I didn't want to hear it anymore. It's been a few days since that call, and they haven't stopped trying to reach out. My mom texted me, asking if I'd be willing to meet them for dinner this weekend to hear them out. But honestly, I don't know. I know I don't owe them anything after the way they've treated me my whole life, but a part of me still feels guilty. I can't shake the feeling that maybe I'm in the wrong, that maybe they're right and I should be the bigger person and help them out despite everything they've done. It's messing with my head. I keep wondering if I was too harsh. A part of me thinks they made their bed and should lie in it, but another part wonders if I'll regret this decision down the road. Am I the asshole for refusing to help my parents after everything they put me through? Update 1. Hey everyone. I wanted to give an update because things have definitely moved forward since my last post. Also, I saw a lot of questions in the comments, so I'll try to clear up a few things. First, a lot of people asked why I don't just cut my sister off too and if I blame her for any of this. I want to make it clear that I don't really have any negative feelings toward my sister herself. Honestly, I don't know her at all. She was just a baby when I left, and I haven't been around since. To me, she's just a kid I never got to know. Any anger or resentment I feel isn't directed at her. It's my parents I'm mad at. They're the ones who treated me like I didn't matter, who ignored me, kicked me out, and now expect me to come back and save them. I also saw some questions about what my parents were like when I was growing up and if there were specific things that made me feel unwanted. It's tough to talk about, but I think it's important to help you all understand why I feel this way. My parents weren't outright abusive, but they definitely made it clear that I was more of a disappointment than anything else. They wanted a girl so badly and openly talked about it. I remember them saying things like, "We waited for our miracle baby," while referring to my sister, and treating me like I was just there to fill the space until she came along. Once my sister was born, they finally got what they'd always wanted, and everything I did was ignored. If I got a good grade, no one noticed. If I had a big moment like a graduation or won an award, it was barely acknowledged. After she was born, it felt like they couldn't wait for me to leave. I was the extra kid they didn't need, which is probably why they kicked me out the moment I turned 18. Anyway, I hope that clears things up. Now here's the actual update. After reading your comments, I decided to take some advice and reach out to my parents. A lot of you suggested that if I wanted closure or a better idea of what they wanted from me, I should meet them in a neutral location. So I ended up asking if they'd be willing to meet at a coffee shop in town. They agreed, and I showed up with the mindset that this was going to be just a talk, not me jumping in to fix anything. I was still angry, but I wanted to hear what they had to say. When I got there, I could see right away that they weren't in good shape. They looked tired, much older than I remembered, and incredibly stressed out. They didn't waste any time and got straight to the point. They began begging me for help. This time, they gave me more information than during our last conversation. Apparently, my sister's issues are far worse than I initially thought. Beyond the substance use and legal trouble, she's been in and out of multiple rehab programs, all of which my parents have had to pay for out of pocket. She's been skipping school, sneaking out, and hanging out with friends who are a terrible influence. They said they've tried everything they could to change her behavior, but nothing has worked. It turns out they've sold a lot of their belongings, including my childhood home, to cover the mounting expenses. Now they're living in a small apartment and barely making ends meet. They even mentioned selling some family heirlooms just to scrape together a bit more money, which they believe will only last them a few more months. They told me all this with desperation in their voices, saying they truly needed my help to get back on their feet. While I felt sorry for their situation, I couldn't help but notice an underlying expectation in the way they spoke to me. They kept bringing up the fact that we're family, that I'm their son, and that it's my duty to help them. It felt like they thought that no matter what they'd done in the past, I should step up simply because we're related. I could sense they were trying to guilt-trip me into feeling like I owed them something after all these years. I supposedly had a duty to help. The way they were talking made it clear they hadn't really processed the hurt they caused me, or even acknowledged how poorly they treated me. They just kept hammering the idea that I should help them because they're my parents, and it's the right thing to do. As they kept talking, I could feel old feelings of anger and resentment bubbling up. It was obvious they didn't see any of this as their fault. They brushed off the fact that they kicked me out, claiming it was just parenting, and that they'd done what was best for the family at the time. They acted as if their treatment of me was completely normal and expected me to forgive and forget, then swoop in to fix their mess. I realized they weren't looking for forgiveness or understanding. They were looking for a solution. And in their eyes, that solution was me. They wanted someone to take on the financial burden of the decisions they'd made over the years. Listening to them talk only made me angrier. They still didn't get it. They didn't understand that they'd pushed me away so hard I barely even knew them anymore. They didn't grasp what family really meant, yet they demanded I treat them like family. When they were done talking, I told them I couldn't help. I explained that I had worked hard to build a life on my own after they left me stranded, and that I wasn't in a position, financially or emotionally, to support them. I told them I didn't feel any obligation to bail them out of a mess they created for themselves. They were furious. They called me selfish, accused me of abandoning my family, and said I was heartless for not helping my sister. Their anger and disappointment felt like déjà vu. It was just like when I was a kid. Nothing had changed. They were still trying to guilt me into feeling like I owed them something. I left that meeting feeling a mix of relief and guilt. Part of me was proud that I stood up for myself and set a boundary, but another part of me felt conflicted. Was I really turning my back on them at their lowest? It's hard to explain, but even though they hurt me deeply, walking away like this still feels strange. I keep thinking about their situation, especially my sister, someone I don't even know. I feel sorry for her, but I also feel like I can't save her. It's painful to realize that, even after all these years, my parents still don't see me as an individual with my own life and struggles. To them, I'm just someone they can use to fix their problems. I'm trying to let go of the guilt, but it's hard. So here I am again asking, did I make the right call by sticking to my decision? Am I wrong for feeling this way? Update 2. Hey everyone, I'm back again because things have gotten even crazier since my last update, which was only about a week ago. Honestly, I thought things would calm down after I made it clear I wasn't going to help my parents financially, but I was way off. Just a few hours ago, I got a call from my sister. This was the first time I'd ever heard from her directly, and it completely caught me off guard. I barely even know her. I only have vague memories of her as a baby back before I left home. So when I picked up the phone and heard her voice, I was stunned. I had no idea what to expect, but I figured maybe she just wanted to talk, considering everything going on with our parents. The call started out okay. She was polite and even sweet, which surprised me given everything I'd heard about her behavior. She asked me to lend our parents money to help them out of their current situation. I could tell she had rehearsed her pitch because she laid it on thick, talking about how much they were struggling and how I could be the one to save the family. But I stood my ground. I told her I wasn't able to help them financially. I kept my tone respectful and tried to explain that my relationship with our parents was complicated, and I had to make decisions that were best for me. That's when everything flipped. My sister went from polite to furious in seconds. She started accusing me of being selfish and abandoning her with all the responsibility of dealing with our parents. She kept repeating that I was turning my back on my family and had always been jealous of her. She claimed I was acting like I was better than them, just because I'd managed to escape and start my own life while they'd been the ones supporting me all along. It was shocking to hear her talk like this, almost as if she'd rehearsed it. She sounded exactly like our parents, and there was such an air of entitlement in her tone. It was as if she genuinely believed it was my duty to step in and fix everything. I was so taken aback that I couldn't even respond. Here was this person I'd never had a relationship with, demanding I clean up after years of decisions I had absolutely nothing to do with. After she finished her rant, she hung up before I could even process what had just happened. I sat there in disbelief, trying to make sense of her anger. It didn't add up. Why did she think I'd abandoned her? Where was all this hostility coming from? I decided I needed to talk to my parents to figure out what was going on. I called them, and as soon as they picked up, I asked them directly if they'd been telling my sister that I abandoned her and them. At first, they hesitated, but they quickly admitted it. They confessed that for years, they told her I left the family because I couldn't handle sharing their attention with her. They painted me as a selfish older brother who cut ties out of jealousy and spite. I felt like the wind had been knocked out of me. All these years my parents had been feeding my sister a twisted, false version of why I left, turning me into some kind of villain. No wonder she felt abandoned. She'd grown up hearing that I walked away because I didn't want to share my parents' attention with her. Meanwhile, the reality was the complete opposite. From the moment she was born, my parents made me feel like an outsider, and they didn't hesitate to kick me out as soon as I turned 18. I hung up on my parents after that. I couldn't handle talking to them any longer, and so far they haven't tried to reach out again. Then again, it's only been a few hours since that conversation. Now I'm left with a mess of emotions I don't know how to deal with. I'm angry at my parents for lying to my sister and making her think I was the one who abandoned them. I'm frustrated with my sister for lashing out at me and demanding help as if I owe it to her. And as much as I hate to admit it, I feel guilty too. I can't fully explain it, but I wish my parents had told her the truth. Maybe if they had, things would be different between us. I don't blame my sister for what she's become. She's just a product of how my parents raised her. But it's hard not to feel resentful. I keep wondering if I should try to get through to her and help her change her behavior. But I also feel like there's too much damage to fix. And honestly, I'm not even sure I want to. This entire situation is exhausting. Just when I thought I was done with my family for good, they came back into my life in the worst possible way. I know a lot of people have suggested I block my parents and move on, but it's not that simple for me. Call me what you will, but they're still my family. As much as I hate it, I feel like I need to know what's going on, at least for my own peace of mind. That said, I won't be reaching out to them first, nor will I help them in any way. It's clear my parents are still manipulating the situation to get what they want, and my sister is too wrapped up in their lies to see the truth. For now, I don't know what else to do but wait and see what happens. Honestly, life has been a lot quieter for me lately. Mostly because I've made the conscious decision to stay out of the mess my parents and sister have created. I'm learning that the best way to find peace is by stepping back and not letting their drama take up any more space in my life. About a month after my last update, my parents called me again. I dreaded picking up, but curiosity got the better of me. This time they were even more desperate. They tried everything they could think of to guilt me into helping them financially. They talked about how bad things had gotten, how they were on the verge of losing everything, and how they needed me to step in and fix it. At first, they leaned hard into the whole family is supposed to stick together guilt trip. Then when that didn't work, they switched tactics and outright threatened to make my life miserable if I didn't help them. Finally, they resorted to a pleading tone, saying I was the only one who could save them now. Honestly, it was disgusting. After everything they've done, they still had the audacity to demand my help without once reflecting on how badly they treated me. I stood my ground. I told them once again that I couldn't help them financially, and that it wasn't my job to clean up the mess they created. I reminded them that they made these choices, and now they had to live with the consequences. Of course, they weren't happy about that. They kept calling me repeatedly for the next month, each time trying a new angle to guilt trip me. It felt like they didn't even care to understand why I was refusing to help. They just saw me as a means to an end. Eventually, though, the calls stopped. I figured they'd finally realized I wasn't going to budge. For a while, I didn't hear anything from them. I hoped it was over. But then just a week ago, they called again. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. What they told me shocked me. Things had only gotten worse. They declared bankruptcy and sold nearly everything they owned to cover their debts. They were essentially starting over with nothing. And then they dropped another bombshell. My sister had cut contact with them completely. At just 13, she'd moved out to live with a friend's family, who apparently supported her behavior. My parents seemed completely resigned, even saying it was for the best that she was no longer living with them because they couldn't handle her anymore. I was floored. Not only had they essentially abandoned my sister, but they still had the nerve to blame me for everything. They told me that if I had just helped them when they first asked, none of this would have happened. It was almost laughable how quickly they deflected responsibility, refusing to admit that their own choices had led to this situation. That's when I'd had enough. I told them point blank that everything happening to them was a result of their own actions. I reminded them of how they kicked me out at 18, treated me like I didn't matter, and ignored me when I was struggling. I told them they never acknowledged how their behavior had affected me, and now instead of taking accountability, they were just trying to shift the blame onto me again. For once, they didn't fight back. Instead, they started backtracking. They apologized and said they regretted everything they'd done to me. They said they wished they could go back and do things differently. It felt like they were saying all the right things, but it was too little, too late. Words couldn't undo years of mistreatment or erase the damage they'd done to both me and my sister. I felt pity for them, but I also knew I couldn't sacrifice the life I'd built for myself to try to fix what was already broken. I told them I couldn't help and that I needed to keep my distance. They were upset, but I stayed firm in my decision. After I hung up, I was left with a mix of emotions. I was angry at them for everything they'd done, but I also felt a deep sadness for what could have been. I wished they'd seen the damage they were causing when they had the chance to change things. But now it's too late. I've made my peace with the fact that I can't save them, and I'm learning to live with that. As for my sister, I don't know what the future holds for her. Maybe someday I'll reach out and try to help her get on the right track. But for now, I have bigger things to focus on: my own life, my own peace. I've come too far to let their mistakes drag me back into their chaos. So this is where I leave things. It's not the happiest ending, but it's the one I've chosen for myself. Thank you to everyone who's followed my story and offered support. It's meant more to me than I can say.